We had 17 tubas, but we didn't have, well, I think we did have 17 horns, but they held one back because it was an E flat horn, not the typical B flat horn. So you tell me I can either march with no horn, or you can give me this 4-valve E flat horn and let me figure it out. Bring it. Let me figure it out.
Hello, and welcome to episode 26 of the BandWagon podcast for the week of August 19th, 2024. On this edition of the program, news and notes from the band world, including the latest Allentown news, a challenging transition, another band-related internet rabbit hole of the week, and a conversation with a real driver of the band world. I'm your host, Rob Hammerton. Hello, dear listener. This episode was put together in a relatively short time. It was, I guess you'd say, a weekend project. Ordinarily, throughout the week prior to an episode dropping, and more than occasionally well in advance of that, I'm writing and researching and recording and such. This past week, though, I was out there on the field, or on the parking lot, or in the rehearsal rooms, in the service of the high school marching band directed by my episode 5 trio guest, Beth Ann Curtis. And it wasn't your standard band, and they were preparing not your standard show, and they were presenting said show in not your standard way, and I may tell you all about that down the road a piece. For the moment, I'll just say, to paraphrase a favorite science fiction character of mine, gallivanting around the marching field is a game for the young. I'll keep on doing it anyway. But as it turns out, a week immersed in the Bandcamp world will adjust your podcast production schedule. Should have seen that coming. Oh well. Noted for future reference. And so, hey saxophones, remember to put sunblock on your neck. You'll thank me. Let's play the first strain. In this episode's first strain, news and notes from the band world. Dateline, Newark, Delaware. This week, Jim Ancona begins his 30th year on the music faculty at the University of Delaware. As was noted by recently retired UD band director Heidi Sarver late last week on social media, for the first time in his entire teaching career, all at UD, he gets to celebrate a milestone all by himself. Ancona and Sarver arrived together at UD as band director and assistant band director in the fall of 1995. Since then, Ancona, an assistant professor of music, has served as the assistant director of the Fight and Blue Hen Marching Band, director of the Basketball Pep Band, and co-director of the Symphonic Band, and as a teacher of music education courses. He is regarded as one of the premier percussion arrangers in the United States. He's presented seminars and performances of his work throughout North America, Europe, and Asia, and several of his works are published by Tapspace Publications, including Upfront, a complete resource for today's pit ensemble, and Upfront Etudes. He's also a contributing author for the book Engaging Musical Practices, a source book for instrumental music. Ancona received his bachelor's degree in music education from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst and his master's degree in performance from Indiana University, where he was awarded the prestigious Performer's Certificate. He has more than 3 decades of experience as a composer and instructor for world-class drum and bugle corps. Currently, he's a percussion advisor for the Boston Crusaders and has served on the instructional staff and as a caption head for championship percussion sections and corps, including Star of Indiana, the Cadets, Santa Clara Vanguard, and the Cavaliers. Several of his percussion arrangements appear in Star of Indiana's brass theater production, as well as the Tony Award-winning Broadway production, Blast. Ancona is an endorser and clinician for the Zildjian Company, Remo, Pearl Drums, and Adams Percussion, and he's a signature artist for Innovative Percussion Incorporated. Innovative Percussion markets a line of keyboard percussion mallets collectively called the James Ancona series. Dateline, Westchester, Pennsylvania. Vivace Productions has announced the lineup of performing ensembles for its 2024 Collegiate Marching Band Festival, which will be held for the 28th time, if my math is correct, on Sunday, October 6th at J. Bernie Crum Stadium in Allentown, Pennsylvania. The current slate of participants includes marching bands from East Stroudsburg University, Moravian University, Caldwell University, St. Francis University, Gettysburg College, Lehigh University, Widener University, Rowan University, Penn West California University of Pennsylvania, Shepherd University, Millersville University, Boston University, Kutztown University, Shippensburg University, the University of Delaware, Towson University, the University of New Haven, and Westchester University. Tickets for the event are available on the web at vivace-productions-inc.ticketleap.com/CMBF2024. You'll find that link in this episode's show notes. And you can use the code EARLYBIRD to get 25% off tickets if you purchase before September 6th. Except group ticket sales aren't included in the discount offer, but you can still buy them. Lots of Allentown show stories to come here on the pod, I'm sure, as the date gets closer. And that's news and notes from the band world for this week. If you have a news item you think should be included in this segment, send me a link via email to heybandwagon@yahoo.com. Now we'll pause briefly, and when we reconvene, I've got a bit of a sobering tale. Okay, let's pick it up at the second strain. In this week's second strain, some thoughts about the process of uprooting. I will begin in the style of Rachel Maddow, which is to say, where's he going with this? Occasionally, professional sports teams will decide to make their homes somewhere other than where they started. The Los Angeles Dodgers used to live in Brooklyn, New York. The Indianapolis Colts started out at the Baltimore Colts. The NBA's Utah Jazz were originally the New Orleans Jazz, which frankly makes a whole lot more sense. Most of the time, these decisions have nothing to do with sports ball and much more to do with economics, or occasionally the weird whim of an owner who doesn't think he has enough money and thinks perhaps he can improve on that condition in another geographical location. And most of the time, the members of the team go to that new location, pick up right where they left off, no muss, no fuss. In the band world, this pulling up of stakes and migrating phenomenon rarely happens. Most of the bands I've ever been associated with in any way have been lashed to the mast of a school. And while on occasion a school band will fold, it'll go away but won't go to a next location. Unless the school moves? And how many times has that ever happened? I mean, there's a non-zero chance, but still. Do military bands find new homes? Only, I would guess, if the base they're housed in is closed down by the Pentagon for some reason. Then, hypothetically, the band would have to be reassigned somewhere. I've been hunting for examples of community bands leaving town. It seems counterintuitive. A community band tends to be identified with, tied to, a community. Yes, the only example that comes to mind right off the top of my head happens to be the one I get to conduct. The Neshoba Valley Concert Band, of whom I spoke in last week's episode, and by the way, yep, our concert last Wednesday night was grand. That band started out life in the 1970s as the Harvard Town Band. For reasons that I'll save for another time, about 20 years ago the band changed its name and changed its rehearsal location, but the north-central Massachusetts towns of Harvard and Shirley, where the band now rehearses, are not all that distant from each other, and the band members probably didn't feel much of an impact regarding travel to rehearsals or to the locations of most of their performances. In the drum and bugle corps world, it is, how shall I say, less uncommon. The Cadets, of whom we have spoken here, were born in Garfield, New Jersey, and in their history they relocated to places like Hackensack and Bergen County and Allentown and Erie, Pennsylvania. But New Jersey and Pennsylvania are neighboring states, so the adjustments might not have been too extreme. For a moment or so, the Spirit of Atlanta relocated to Jacksonville State University in Alabama, and again, geography majors, Alabama and Georgia are neighbors, although in that part of the country those distances can be greater. The Skyriders were a drum corps with roots in Hutchinson, Kansas. Over the last decade or so of its 35 years based in Hutchinson, the corps membership evolved to become predominantly Texan, so the corps moved its headquarters to DeSoto, just outside Dallas, Texas, and went inactive 4 years later. The Kiwanis Cavaliers had their home base in Ontario, Canada for 30 seasons before moving their headquarters to Miami, Florida in 2006. And the Crossman Drum Corps spent time between its founding in 1974 and 2006 based in a few communities in the Philadelphia area, staying for the longest times in Westchester, Pennsylvania and Newark, Delaware, and then in 2006 they moved to San Antonio, Texas, where they still live. Some of those corps had national profiles sufficient to attract auditionees and eventual members from all over the country. Crossman and Spirit of Atlanta are routinely seen on the live-streamed DCI prelims and semifinals, at least. Other corps are not so fortunate or successful. Which brings me to an announcement that I read last week. In the context of all these DCI member corps migration stories, it wasn't an unfamiliar sort of announcement, but it did attract my attention and my particular sympathy because it did hit close to home to an extent. The announcement read, in part, quote, "Through a thoughtful approach to balancing growth and maintaining a presence in New Jersey, Fusion Corps has decided to make a strategic move to Florida to enhance its growth and development. Relocating can offer numerous benefits such as increased visibility, access to a larger talent pool, and a potentially more supportive environment. These changes can also provide new opportunities for partnerships and collaborations, which can be crucial for long-term success. We will also be establishing a new performing ensemble in New Jersey so we can stay connected to our roots and community while exploring opportunities and resources in Florida that will ensure long-term stability and sustainability, all while nurturing our connection to New Jersey." Now, to be clear, I don't know the ins and outs of Fusion Corps' situation, far from it. I don't know the people in charge. I don't know nothing. And as such, I have to be very careful about making assumptions about things which may not be accurate. I do try to be a proper journalist. In fact, I reread the press release and discovered a detail that may have adjusted my initial reaction to it all, thus solidifying my commitment to, well, let me sleep on it and see what I think in the cold morning light. So that's a caveat to keep in your back pocket as you listen. One difference in Fusion Corps' reality is that by comparison with those other corps I mentioned, they are an all-age corps, very recently a drum corps associates senior corps type of group. The memberships of those groups tend to be predominantly local. These folks are, after all, drum and bugle corps weekend warriors. All-age corps' rehearsal and performance schedules are designed to accommodate the school and career and family schedules of the performers. Oh, during my time in and near the UMass Band, did I ever hear stories about the great lengths that some of my friends went to march with the Reading Buccaneers or the Bushwhackers, but for the most part, it stays very local. So when an all-age corps announces that they're going to pull up stakes and move many hundreds of miles away from their original established location, and Fusion Corps had been headquartered in Morris County, New Jersey since 2007, my immediate feeling is sympathy and concern for the marching members who, since nobody ages out of all-age corps, might have found a marching home for 1 or 2 or 17 years. And now, what? Is it even possible for them to be weekend warriors when the ensemble is that far away from where they all live, presumably in the tri-state area? Even if it were possible from a schedule standpoint, do they have the financial means to get to Florida rehearsals and performances? There are lots of other questions that logically arise from this development, and I'm not probably qualified to raise any of them. I'm just simply not familiar enough, not connected enough with the activity and this particular group to be able to speak competently about them. So instead, I'll offer up, in this case, it's not cynical to offer thoughts and prayers to the Fusion Corps membership in this moment of extreme uncertainty, and that includes my episode 18 trio guest and friend of the podcast, Jenna Foley. That is, in fact, how I first heard about all this, and it is, predictably, the reason why I've spent quite a bit of head time on it. And I'll also offer up hopes that the idea of establishing a new performance ensemble in New Jersey isn't just an empty promise, that it can actually come to fruition in such a way that the New Jersey-based Fusion Corps membership maybe won't have to go find new marching families, even as the organization goes out in search of increased visibility and access to a larger talent pool. All right, let's observe a grand pause. And on the other side of this break, a conversation. And let this be a lesson to my younger listeners. This is what you get if you make a friend in your school band. Okay, let's modulate and get into the trio section. This week in the trio section, I am joined by a gentleman with whom I go back quite a ways, closing in on, I hesitate to say, but it's true, closing in on 40 years, which can be a daunting thing to say until one considers that sometimes it's both the quantity and the quality. His resume is all over the place, both in band and non-band terms, I feel like. And we have shared memories that are both amazing and absurd and perfectly comprehensible to people who get caught up in the band thing, I think. He's all kinds of things. And if you don't know him already for some reason, where you been? This is your opportunity to get properly caught up. Please help me welcome to the program, BASIL ISTWANY. Basil.
Oh, it's good to be here. You make it sound so important.
Now, some folks, you can remember the precise moment you first crossed paths with them, and others not as much. And for whatever reason, you are the latter. And don't take that the wrong way, but at some point during my sophomore year at UMass, I looked around and we were friends, or friendly. You were friendly with everybody. And it made sense. And all this time later, cut to the chase, I was at your wedding, you were in mine. Friends, it's this kind of thing the band can do for you. So it's
Absolutely. It doesn't feel like 40 years.
it's not as if, 40 years we marched together and then 38 years later we reconnected. There's content through all of it.
Well, and I feel like family. Your dad and mom always made me feel like family. Your sister made me feel like family. I think your mom, when I didn't get the job at UMass, was almost more upset than my own mom.
Now, our conversations, because we are who we are, can very often kind of swerve and swirl around, and I have no problem with this. But for purposes of pretending to establish some kind of structure, as sort of a half-hearted attempt at structure, and also to begin to allow people to get some idea of who they're dealing with, let me toss you some of the opening questions that I've done in a lot of these trio sections, and then we can go color inside the lines a little bit, or maybe outside the lines a little bit.
Okay.
I, of course, know the answer to this one, but what is your primary instrument?
Our primary instrument is tuba. That should be no surprise, I guess.
But what got you into playing?
Well, I probably, like, I would think 90% of tuba players. I started on trumpet back in elementary school, and range was never really there. And got to middle school and progressed down to the baritone slash euphonium. And poof, by the time I got to high school, I had the size and the wind. So they moved me over to tuba slash sousaphone, and it's been that way ever since. And it's a blast.
I'm having a tiny pang of, I don't want to say regret exactly, but kind of a moment of what could have been, because my early trumpet experience was exactly that. The range didn't happen. I sometimes wonder if I was maybe 2 or 3 private lessons away from that, or maybe my chops were just not built for trumpet. I don't know. And I very often said that if someone, when I was in the 5th or 6th grade, had put a baritone horn in my hands, I might have become a brass person. In an alternate universe, we end up marching tuba next to each other. Can you even imagine?
Wow, that would be too much fun. We would be in trouble all the time. I wonder, maybe you can answer this. Do the tubas still tail in the parades?
So far as I know, yes.
Okay, cool. That's good news. I mean, it made the parades a whole lot longer. If it was a 3-mile parade, we probably did 5, but
And for context, this is a perfectly legitimate moment to pose this question because it'll get us around. But what bands have you been active with in your life?
I mean, there's just, the typical middle school, high school band, UMass Marching Band, UMass Concert Band, UMass Symphony Band, and then took a hiatus when I moved down to Virginia, probably almost 10 years where I wasn't playing, but then ended up working with a local wedding band. Can I drop a name?
Sure, do.
Well, it's a local wedding band out of Charlottesville, Big Ray and the Cool Cats. They travel quite extensively, and I was just doing roadie work. I was their roadie. They had a 2-team. One was the sound guy. I was just a muscle. And we went as far north as Nantucket Island and as far south as Vero Beach, Florida, doing wedding gigs. And that got me around musicians again and got me the desire to start playing again. And then a friend from a local gym that we were working out at said, come see the Charlottesville Municipal Band. So we went and saw a show, and I'm like, that's it. I should be doing this. I should be playing again. And I think that was like 11 or 12 years ago now. So the Charlottesville Band, I think they've shortened it now to Seville Band due to the municipalities not supporting as much as they used to.
Interesting.
But the band is 102 years old now. in year 100, we had a huge fundraising event. Basically, the 100th year, we had lost funding from the city. Other funding seemed slight, so we had a huge campaign. There was, I'm not sure if it was anonymous, but there was a benefactor who basically said, look, I will match dollar for dollar anything you raise up to 500K.
Well,
We exceeded that, so we were able to create a capital fund, put it aside, and now hopefully we'll be set for the next 100.
through my association with the community band that I'm with now I get to have the monthly copy of the Association of Concert Bands magazine, and there was a big old article about the 100th anniversary, I think, and there was mention of the fundraising effort, but it didn't go too hard into the grimy details necessarily. But I remember looking at it and saying, I know somebody in that band.
Well, it is funny because now that makes me think about when I first joined the band, and you play prominently into this story.
Oh,
I'm in, and you get to introduce yourself, yada yada. I'm from yada yada. And one of the percussionists is like, "You went to UMass? I know someone from UMass." And I'm like, "Oh, come on! Just the thousands of people at UMass.
and we're in Virginia.
Yeah. Well, Rob Hamilton is our choral director. Is it Doug? I can't think of the last name. Starts with a Z.
Doug Zanzo.
Zanzo. There you go. Boom. The world shrank once again.
Yeah.
What are the chances?
Slim, but not none. How about that?
Definitely not none. Yeah, and we're about 85 strong. And the other thing, we were blessed or cursed. I'm not sure. Depends on who you ask. In the summer, we have a lot of college students come back, and that's great. That's not the blessing or the curse. It just happens that two of them are tuba players. So we had 7 tubas for the summer. I don't know how many community bands have 7 tubas, and this is a blessing. We have 2 phenomenal oboe players. I think they were both attached to military bands at some point, Air Force and Navy. So our director, the book is wide open. Whatever you want to play, we've got the oboe players for it. Go nuts. Because if you don't have the oboe player, some stuff is just not available. Sorry, can't do it.
This is not dumping on saxophones, but oboe cued and alto sax is not always the same. So where were we? We were in Charlottesville, and we were appreciating 2 oboes. That's where we were.
Just brings me back to the trumpet part, because I remember now back at UMass being taking the trumpet techniques class, and Professor Chestnut gave all us tuba players like a Schilke 24. You're not going to go high, but you'll get a dark sound. Here, try this. You give me the 11th trumpet part, I'm good.
Yeah.
But yeah, and with the Seville band, we have a bunch of small ensembles. I play with the Ravenna Winds, which initially was a polka band, but now it's more of a Dixieland-ish band. And then there's a brass quintet that I play along with, and we stay busy. We do about 11 to 12 full concerts and probably 30 to 40 small ensemble concerts every year.
It's just occurred to me that you talked up a number of UMass ensembles you were in, and we completely blew by the hoop band and all the basketball experiences we had during the mid-'80s and then the early 90s. And if you know, you know.
It was incredible.
Musically, it was just fun. I mean, for me, playing in it, it was the only place on that campus I was going to be able to play jazz ensemble stuff, because I wasn't getting into chapel jazz and I wasn't getting into jazz 1. So that wasn't happening. So as soon as they decided that the hoop band instrumentation should be big band, I said, I am all in kind of on the ground floor of that. And then to be near it, I mean, by the time I graduated, UMass basketball was still not making the pivot toward greatness. But right after I graduated, John Calipari was hired as coach. And so over the course of those 5 or 6 years after that, it was fun to be near the band while the band was near the meteoric rise.
Yeah, and the university didn't know how to handle any of it. They didn't know what to do.
No.
Once the basketball team started winning, they had no clue. But I just enjoyed playing your charts.
And that was, for me, obviously the other real fun part of it is that I'm putting notes down on a page, and we had a pack, as I recall, of people who would copy parts out. I didn't have to do that stuff. I think at the time I both did and did not realize what a luxury that was, considering that music notation software was not happening yet. So it was all pencil and paper. I can easily say that if I hadn't had, Craig and Rob and all those people who were in there waiting for the score to appear so that they could go and copy out the parts for their section, I would have produced 1/6 of the output, guaranteed.
Yeah, this is behind the scenes. I didn't even know that this was going on. I just
Yeah.
didn't even realize that there were parts people.
I will say it over and over again until people get sick of it. I was unbelievably fortunate in that, and I was super fortunate that Tom of Clan Hannum was willing to give me a shot. Was willing to. I always say that the second bravest thing he ever did was to read my initial arrangement during a rehearsal, and the bravest thing he ever did was to read the second one. In our lives, in whatever area of our lives, we can often point to the people without whom, we'd be in that alternate universe where we're not doing this.
Yeah. There's so many whys, where something happened and suddenly you're pushed one direction for, at the time, didn't seem like any particular reason, but then suddenly poof, you're off, and you look back and go, how did I get here?
Some of that for me was that I was just pleased that I was still intimidated by Tom, but he didn't appear to be laughing at me. So I'll take that. And then a couple of years later, he looks at me and says, "We need to get you writing for the field." And I said,
that's definitely not laughter.
No, and this is a sphere I did not realize. I might have realized that I aspired to it, but I didn't see a path to it, and I didn't exactly possess the grit to stride up to somebody and say, "I would like to do this." So yes, to be able to point to some folks who look over and say, let's give this little sprout a chance.
Yeah. Awesome.
But to have the group improve along with the basketball team to the point where there was a year, and we will unearth memories of this, there was a year when the majority of the saxophone section in that band was, if they weren't jazz majors, they were music majors of some kind.
Absolutely. The sax lines from Chapel Jazz and Jazz One, they were like, "Hey, I want to be at this game too." Okay, there's no limit, so Tom just took them all. Same with the trumpets.
I was going to say, and between that and the trumpet players we had in there who were routinely taking the fight song up an octave because they wanted to.
I'm just, again, glad to be able to kind of just glom on with the bass trombone and muddle through and be proficient's too strong a word. To be able to muddle through by the end.
Well, the whole Minuteman Band program, I remember it being attractive to me when I was looking at where to go to college, because it did not appear that there was going to be an audition process to get into the marching band. And I said, great, show and go. Terrific. And we were able to have a band full of people who, we weren't all at the same level, but we were all in the same band, and that was what counted.
Yeah, it makes me think too. Freshman year with marching band, we had 17 tubas, but we didn't have. I think we did have 17 horns, but they held one back because it was an E flat horn, not the typical B flat horn. So you're telling me I can either march with no horn, or you can give me this 4-valve E flat horn and let me figure it out. Right, let me figure it out.
Wow.
Because that was going to be a whole lot better than marching with no horn. So unfortunately, I memorized Fight Mass and the E flat. So it took a while to get it back over to the B flat later. Kept wanting to go back to the E flat fingering.
A wise person once told me that sometimes no transition is transition. So here goes. There's at least one other element of life on the Amherst campus that instantly makes me think of you. And the one I'm thinking of now is the Pioneer Valley Transit Authority. I don't know whether you were the first person that I knew who was in the marching band and also drove a bus for the PBTA.
Yeah.
But it's...
Well, there must have been plenty before that, but it's just...
At this point, it feels to me like a rather considerable percentage of the PVTA bus driver contingent are UMass band people. I mean, from then
Yeah,
straight on to now.
we definitely opened the door. I think they were a bit concerned initially because of scheduling.
Uh,
Not for any other reason that they didn't think we were reliable, but well, maybe they thought we were unreliable because we probably would have picked marching band over showing up for a shift.
could be fair.
Maybe that could be fair, but I think we would have not taken that shift or found a way to swap it out. I would like to think Mr. Parks would want us to do it the right way.
Yes.
But yeah, it was definitely transit was a great job, and it was a little bit challenging to work around the schedule. But it's only the fall schedule. Spring is a whole lot easier.
I was working hard to remember before we got going. You drove for the cadets.
Yes. In 1992, I drove the whole summer with the cadets to Tame the Perilous Sky tour, and it was an exciting time. It was a difficult time, not having been literally on the road for the entire summer. And it was a fabulous show to watch come together because it was, at least according to those in the know, it was rough when we came out, but it steadily improved over the summer. And I missed the illness, I guess, at camp prior to leaving on tour. There was definitely a stomach illness that ripped through the core early on.
Oof.
But the reason I think I did 92 was there was a whole contingent of UMass tuba players out on tour that summer. So trying to make sure I get everyone. CJ Lombardo, Don Mason, Dan Reeder, Andy DeVivo. Am I leaving anybody out? John Curry was teaching. Mike Coogan was playing soprano. I think that's the list. But it was a lot of fun hanging with them all summer. And hanging's maybe not the right word, but seeing them perform all summer.
I'm trying to imagine what the schedule of a corps bus driver is going to be. Clearly, you've got to be on duty at a time when the corps is sacked out.
Yeah.
You're going from the end of a competition later in the evening to somewhere where they're going to bed down and whatnot. And so you're not going to I'm presuming you're not necessarily going to get the opportunity to sit and watch all the rehearsals because you got to find some sleep somewhere. But
yeah, absolutely. We're at a school. We tried to find the coolest room possible. You know, if we get there early in the morning, we'll try to sack out. Then typically in the afternoon, once rehearsals are done, you'll load up and head to the venue. Early on, I tried to watch all the shows, but later in the season, I did miss a couple of shows just trying to catch up on some sleep because, you know, if the show ended at 10, 11 o'clock, the corps would typically have their fifth meal of the day after the show and then pack up and drive the 4 to 7 hours, depending, onto the next location. And that the toughest time was that 4 a.m. until the sun came up, or 3 a.m. until the sun came up. Once the sun came up, it got easier, but that was the toughest time. And they didn't want to stop, so we're trying our hardest not to stop anywhere, because if we stopped, the buses were going to empty. Everyone was going to use the bathroom and come back on. So we were going. So yeah, it was a little challenging, and you know, I was ill prepared with cushions and pillows. So by the end, you had it down with your Thermarest and something to help you get at least a little rest.
I think when I was a little, I mean a tiny kid, I saw a bus driver, not just a school bus driver, but a motor coach bus drivers, and thought, that is what I would like to be. And did not remotely, because you don't think that at 3 and 4 years old. You don't think about things like, you've got to drive at a time when the human body is thinking, sleep would be great right now.
Yeah. But the hardest working folks, I think, are the food truck folks. They're just busy all the time because of the amount of calories these guys were burning. I mean, they were being fed 5 times a day.
Wow.
And they lost weight. I mean, even Andy lost weight. I mean, you know, Andy,
Yeah.
he didn't have much to lose anyway,
You
but
go.
he
Yeah.
did.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, but it was definitely fun seeing all the other groups as well. I mean, it was just a blast.
I think I never really knew how much contact a touring group would have with other groups. There was a time when I grasped that because of the schedule, there might be two or three corps that were basically traveling together for stretches. And I think at the time I imagined that, I mean, seeing the work that was being done there, I could imagine that they have to be a pack of competitive people. And because of that, my imagination filled in the gaps, possibly wrong, and just thought, I bet you they pull into the same lot. They don't talk to each other. They've got to, we're focused on our show kind of thing. Am I wrong? Was I wrong?
Well, I don't think they even had the time
Uh,
to worry about it. I mean, because everything was on a schedule. You get there, you're making sure your uniform is proper, you're making sure your shoes are ready, you're making sure your instruments are ready. Then you're going to warm up, go over whatever you need to go over. So there was very little opportunity to interact. The only time would have been after the show, after retreat, when you're back by the vehicles and having a meal. That is the only time where there may have been some cross, I don't know, pollinating is not the right word, but
uh,
opportunity to communicate.
yeah.
Because other than that, your schedule is full.
I wonder if what drove my imagination to think that it was just butting heads all the time, or it was that I do remember it is different now due to one thing and another, but when we were marching at UMass, if the Yukon band had shown up, sorry, no. And there was a time up until Mr. Parks told us to knock it off that anytime that the Westchester University band was mentioned, there was a hiss. And partly because it was his alma mater, he decided, okay, enough of this. But also, can we see if we can play the game along the lines of, if bands don't support each other, nobody else is going to, so let's cut this out, which made sense in the moment. But I kind of carried that band rivalry thing of the mid-'80s with me into that. So maybe that's what kind of caused me to go there.
Well, I mean, it may have been, but they just didn't have the time or the energy to
Yeah.
even to
Mm-hmm.
worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
They're eating, sleeping, rehearsing, or performing, or getting ready. Because there was a lot to do just to make sure you were ready to go on.
Mm.
And the cadets, especially, well, you would never be by yourself. If you were heading somewhere, you always had someone with you,
Mm.
and you most likely, once you were in uniform, weren't speaking.
Ah.
Period. Until maybe within the corps you were speaking, but you most likely wouldn't be speaking. And maybe I'm misremembering because it was a while ago. But yeah, you didn't take the opportunity or have the opportunity to communicate much once you were in uniform. You were getting your game face on and getting ready for the show.
Kind of the reason you were there. That would make sense. The behind the scenes part of it all became, I mean, I've always been a behind the scenes sort of a person. Anytime there's been a documentary on TV about the making of this movie or whatever, I've been all over it. But as soon as I graduated, to see the part of band or drum corps or whatever that the tourists don't get to see was fascinating to me. And when I got involved with music education and had my own little band to travel around with, to the extent that we travel around, which is a very, 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 very small extent, but nonetheless, the various places I've been as a band director and a band assistant, but I enjoyed ordering up the buses for some reason. I enjoyed calling the company and saying, okay, we're going here.
Okay, we need.
Let's work this out, et cetera, et cetera. And having that in the back of my mind and thinking about you on the road with the drum corps, it leads me to one of the myriad of band-related memories that we share. And it was mid-'90s. I am in my first year as a graduate assistant with the Boston University Bands, and it gets into the late winter, early spring, and it's tournament time for the various sports that the pep bands were covering. And I was given the assignment by Joe Wright, who was the band director there, who was on the podcast several weeks ago. He was my boss, and he looked at me and said, okay, so we've got to split the band in two directions, and one half of the band is going to go, we're going downtown on that weekend because it's Hockey East semifinals and finals, and the men's basketball team is going to go down to Delaware because the University of Delaware is hosting the basketball league tournament. And so we're going to send half the band that way. And Joe looked at me and said, partly because I am the senior guy here, and also partly because I want to be there, I will take the band that's going to Hockey East. And you know the Delaware campus a little bit because you've been there a couple of times. So you get to go down to Delaware. And you know Heidi down there, so it'll be fine. Oh, yeah. And I said, that's really great. And so we ordered up, rather than a motor coach or anything, for whatever reason that was, we decided that it was going to be, I'm thinking it would have to have been 3 vans. I'm thinking of the number of people that were going. And I think the question came up, do we know who's driving? And I said, I don't know who's driving, but I know somebody who drives. So
we made some stops along the way.
It was not, I would judge it wasn't one of those legendary band trips where absolutely everything went wrong. I do, though, remember on the way back, we had some folks who were living in the Boston area, so they were going to come all the way back north from Delaware. But we also had some people who lived at various points along the New Jersey Turnpike. So one of the vans was going to make local stops, and at least one of the others was going to be the express. And I think at that point, we were working with walkie-talkies back and forth amongst the vans because it was a little, dear Lord, it was a little bit before cell phones.
But yeah, walkie-talkies, absolutely.
So I'm not convinced that all the vans got back to the university at the same time. And I do remember, I know that there was a certain amount of waiting that went on, and it might have involved that. But I also remember that we took a van, at least one of them, back to the rental place and somehow got back to campus, at which point you and I were standing outside my car looking at it, staring at it accusingly because the doors were frozen shut.
Yes, absolutely. I do recall that.
The weather had kicked in on the way back, and so it was snowing to some extent all the way back up the New Jersey Turnpike, and we get back to the BU campus, and there's my little car. It's still there, so nobody swiped it, which is great, but also it's going to take a crowbar, I think, to get the door open.
Yeah, it was frozen shut. I think the lock was frozen. It wouldn't turn.
That's what it was.
But if I recall correctly, your dad came to the rescue.
Yeah. It was the value of living locally and having a dad who was part of the whole once a band parent, always a band parent thing. But I do remember standing outside in what could not have been the most comfortable winter temperatures and thinking, we thought we were done with this trip. I was not enthusiastic is not the right word, but I was going to be glad for the opportunity to shake your hand and say, thank you for doing this. And we'll make sure we get you some kind of bagel or something as recompense or whatever it was. And thinking it was a good time with a great friend, and I can't get in my car. And this gentleman is not just getting in his car and going home. And it's not that was a surprise to me, but it was absolutely appreciated.
Well, no, that's what you do. That's it.
It was the end of a 3-day trip where it was really my first multi-state band trip where I was ultimately the buck stopped with me. So it was kind of nice to have that ace in the hole. It was nice to have somebody that, quite honestly, had my back.
Well, yeah. Well, and the other thing that was part of it is New Jersey is somewhat confusing because atypical. It doesn't have rest areas on both sides. So sometimes they don't line up. And if we're heading north and you say we're meeting at one that's only available on the south side, we looped back.
Speaking of memories that I had quite honestly repressed.
No, that's all right.
I think it's safe to say that any conversation that we do is probably going to end with these stories and many, many more that we didn't get to at all.
A lot of fun stuff, a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of unexpected stuff.
I think standing in that Boston University parking lot and knowing that I was sharing this absurd, and we'll laugh about this someday, memory with somebody who, yes, at heart, I knew that you weren't looking at me saying, you jackass, you got me into this.
No, absolutely not. We're in it together. And how can we get out of it is really the question.
And in a half-hearted attempt at structure, which we kind of did in some way.
Yeah, we tried. We tried.
I am interested now to offer up a few of those questions that I tend to wrap up with.
Okay.
And the first of them is there a favorite piece of band music that you have played, whether it's been in an outdoors or indoors setting?
I will always remember playing Festive Overture in '88. Whether it was the combination of the music and the drill, it was a phenomenal memory that will stick with me. Another memory, maybe I shouldn't say favorite, but just outstanding performance was it '88 as well? Doing Malagueña with Eric Shadeen, doing the trombone solo.
Because I'm a nerd, I know that was '88.
It was '88, okay, because I'm thinking you were there.
It was my first year not in a uniform.
So, and we were not a small band, but yet he was able to sail over the band.
Unamplified.
Yeah. So that's always a memory that's going to stick out. And then inside, my favorite piece recently, maybe not performing, but back to UMass, it was probably, I could say, 8 years ago now. The Marine Band did a tour. Dave Jenkins, who's in the Marine Band, was the tour organizer, and they made a stop at UMass. And Malcolm Rao got to conduct the Marine Corps Band doing Irish. So just being able to see him conduct again was pretty moving.
Go the opposite direction. Is there a piece of band music that you've never played but you would like to?
Flowerdale. Sounds silly. Maybe not silly is not the right word. Philip Spark. Have you heard it?
I have not. I'm going to now.
Oh, go check it out. There's a British band playing it. Cornet player, is it Roberts? They're in a green and black uniform. It is absolutely beautiful. I mean, the tuba part probably doesn't really matter, but the piece is just stunning.
That's a big statement from a tuba player.
The cornet soloist makes it seem effortless, and it's fabulous. So I would love to be able to play that, but who knows?
Is there a band that you would like to perform with that you haven't?
Would have loved to have done drum corps, but it just didn't line up. I didn't find out till I was too old, and I think that's one of the reasons why I ended up going out driving.
Well, I will say this is in many ways exactly what I expected, and there were also new things I learned about this. Well, not to get too overly inside baseball, inside the inner workings behind the scenes of your local podcast, but when we set this conversation up, you wondered aloud whether you had anything of merit to say. And my first reaction was, oh, come on, I mean, really. But although this is very much what the band activity allows, it's the opportunity to make friends that years later were anywhere from absurd to very philosophical, and it all works. It's all fine. So I was thinking as we were setting up for this, I think Basil is selling himself short, but better too humble than not humble enough. And
the list of people before me, I can't follow them.
But the point of this podcast was it's for people who did band, and logically it ought to be full of people who did band. And my friend, you absolutely qualify. And it has always been a pleasure to do business with you in all the possible ways, and may it continue into the future. That's what I say.
And I miss you.
Right back at you, man. And now, dear listener, you are properly caught up, as promised. You know Basil. After another pause, more BandWagon is on the way. Here comes the dogfight. This week's dogfight is another band-related internet rabbit hole of the week. in which I offer up one of my online excursions that you might be inspired to pursue yourself, thereby completely wiping out an evening. This week's Rabbit Hole of the Week springs from the occasionally helpful Recommended for You section of the YouTube page that is located either below or to the side of a video that you're watching. In my case, it was probably some community band video, quite possibly the Waterloo Band I talked about a couple of episodes ago in this segment, but I could be wrong about that. But one of the recommended videos was entitled Broadway Showstoppers, and that video's thumbnail image was of a group in concert black and white on a stage with some lovely organ pipes in the background. And as usual, I said, what the heck, let's give it a whirl. And click, click, click. Well, just one click. And that one click later, I had spent some time with the most recent concert of the Kansas City Wind Symphony. Kansas City has a wind symphony, and they're pretty easy to listen to. The ensemble was founded in late 1998 as a volunteer ensemble of professional and accomplished amateur musicians selected by competitive audition. The membership comes from throughout Kansas and Missouri, and the repertoire historically appears to have emphasized classic band works and transcriptions of orchestral masterworks. The ensemble's website suggests that right from the get-go, they have not gone in for baby music exactly. From 2001 to 2017, Dr. Philip Posey was the ensemble's principal conductor. Since then, their conductor has been Dr. Langston Hemingway. Both conductors were or are of the music faculty of William Jewell College, located in Liberty, Missouri, just a few miles northeast of Kansas City. Their concerts are, again, full of interesting and not fluffy repertoire. I'll put a link to their YouTube channel in this week's show notes, where you can find lots of full-length concert videos that nonetheless all have helpful timestamps in the video description area, so you can jump right to a particular piece of music that may interest you. Or just hit play and enjoy. I think you will. Okay, one last brief pause, and then I'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for continuing to listen. To wrap up this week, let's take the coda. For the coda this week, may I make a request? In the nearly 6 months since this podcast launched, I have on occasion gently apologized for the wealth of references to my alma mater band, the old UMassR crowd, and its director of 33 years, George Parks. Again, there are other bands that have figured prominently in my band life, whom I will get to presently, don't you worry, in spite of the fact that perhaps some listeners have been waiting for that present to arrive for 26 episodes now, and let's go already! I will, I promise. Tales of Boston and Worcester, Massachusetts, and New Britain, Connecticut, and Newark, Delaware are poised on the starting line. Speaking of which, right now, as you listen, Dr. Brooke Johnson is well into her very first preseason marching band camp as the University of Delaware's new director, and the Blue Hen Band is comfortably up over 300 people, and go get 'em! But in the middle of next month, there will drop a BandWagon podcast episode that deals with a significant anniversary, and a large percentage of my dear listenership will already know which anniversary that is. And I would like that episode to be full of content that comes from lots of people who aren't me, even though I'll contribute too. So if you have a story or two about memories of or interactions with the late great George N. Parks, be it about the Minuteman Band or DMA or the Buccaneers or some other vaguely band-related thing, or not, I would love to hear them. Please, sometime in the next few weeks, if you'd be so kind as to drop me an email and tell me a story that I can include in the trio section of episode 30, I would be thrilled. And since some stories are better told out loud than in print, if you'd like to record a story as a 90-second voice message, that'd be great too. And since some stories don't fit into 90 seconds, if you want to tell it full length, then drag out your phone's voice recording app, tell your tale into it, and we can figure out a way to get that audio file to me. And since some coda sections don't fit into 90 seconds either, whoops, it's now time to tell you, among other things, where you can send all those stories. That's BandWagon for this week. Thanks as always for downloading and listening. BandWagon was written, researched, and produced by your humble host. Musical interludes were produced by Hammerton Media, from source material largely by John Philip Sousa. You can listen to more episodes at our website, heyband.podbean.com. Please give me feedback, let me know what you like or what you think might change. You can do that using our email address, heybandwagon@yahoo.com, or leave us a 90-second voice message by going to speakpipe.com/heybandwagon. Be aware that we do reserve the right to include your message on the podcast, unless you say otherwise. Those contact links and links to our news items, conversation topics, and my interview guest, BASIL ISTWANY, can be found in our show notes. Please share the show on social media, and thank you for that. If you enjoy this podcast, get someone else to listen as well. Word of mouth really is the best recruiting tool. And to keep up with us every week, subscribe to BandWagon on the Podbean app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. And please rate and review. It really helps other people to find the show. For now, take care, stay in touch, stay in tune, and we'll do this all again next week. I'm Rob Hammerton. Get on the bus, get on the bus, get on the bus, get on the bus, get on the bus.